Hi, my name is Michael Andrew, and I'm about to give you a free 2-hour tutorial on the operation of the Sony A6400. It's a very interesting camera. It features a front-facing monitor, so if you do vlogging, you can see yourself as you're recording. It also has some outstanding focusing systems. I'll have some tests coming to this channel. If you want to see them, be sure to subscribe. If you are coming from another camera system or you're an experienced photographer, check out our table of contents. You can hit Control F or Command F depending on your computer, type in the keyword, and if we have a chapter marker for it, it'll be highlighted, hit the time code, and it'll jump to that specific part of this video. This was designed to be a video manual, and feel free to come back and reference to it as often as you like. For those of you who are pure beginners or intermediate photographers and you're still struggling with photography, I have to give you a word of warning. This video alone is not going to be enough for you to take great images. There are many skill sets and pieces of knowledge that you have to be able to combine in order to really just crush it in photography. So I can teach you about the camera, but if you don't know about shutter speed and aperture and things of that nature, there's an artistic side, there's a lighting side, there's a digital planning side for the files, things of that nature. You're going to be frustrated. And when I got started back in 2003, we didn't have YouTube. I had to learn through trial and error. And I remember at one point I was so frustrated, I wanted to take my camera and throw it into a brick wall. I almost gave up, but I didn't. I stuck with it, and photography has been one of the greatest sources of joy in my life. And so I make you that promise. You're going to run into some frustrations, but my job is to get you through it. And the teaching style that I use is to focus on the pre-visualization. So I want you to see the images up here. Before you take your picture, use the camera as an extension of your brain. This is where the magic happens, right here. It's not in the camera. It's how you think about photography. All that said, I have an A6400 crash course coming. It's going to teach you all these other skill sets and pieces of knowledge. There's tons of information in there. And then I show you how to synergize them, specifically using your camera. Course is about anywhere from 5 to 6 hours. They grow over time. You know, we get requests for new lessons and we add them. Comes with a 100% money back guarantee, so there's no risk. It's a phenomenal investment if you're just getting started. I'll put a link in the description. It'll take you to my blog. If you leave your name and your email address, we will reach out to you as soon as it's ready. Typically takes about 3 or 4 weeks to put together. Another awesome resource is Tony Northrup's Stunning Digital Photography. I think it's a great value, great investment. I know Tony, he's a friend of mine, but he didn't ask me to include that link. I just think it's a really great resource, so definitely check that out. We have a tremendous amount of information to cover, so let's get started. Let's go over all the external buttons and ports so you know exactly what each does, and you will know what I'm talking about in later lessons. The most important button on your camera is the shutter button, and as on most cameras, this is a two-phase button, meaning it has 2 depths of activation. The first is a halfway depression, which you are going to feel as a spongy resistance. This is going to focus the image depending on where your focusing square is, in your viewfinder or on your monitor. Pushing it down all the way is going to take the picture. Take the time to train your finger to know the difference between these 2 positions. On the top of the camera, we have the mode dial. It is going to allow us to control how our camera behaves when we change our settings. We'll be talking about this much more later. To the right of the mode dial, we have a small rotating wheel right above where our right thumb would rest. This is our control dial. I like to refer to it as the primary selector, and it will allow us to change our shutter speed, our aperture, depending on what mode we are in. In the manual mode, it is going to change your aperture. On the back of the camera, there is a wheel, which I like to call the multi-selector because of the many ways it works. When you rotate it, by default, it will act as the primary exposure control as well. However, in manual mode, rotating this wheel will change your shutter speed. Something that is easy to miss at first glance is that this rotating wheel can also be pushed directionally. So up, down, left, or right, in order to change different settings, to navigate the menu options, move around on a zoomed image, things of that nature. This is going to be very useful when going through the menu and making different choices. When you are in a shooting mode, meaning you can see your subject in the viewfinder or monitor right before you take the shot, this directional pad will allow us to select different features, and you probably also notice these icons. For example, if we want to change our ISO, we would press to the right, which would open the ISO selection menu, and then we can navigate by rotating or pressing directionally on our wheel. If we want to change our shooting drives, which is what the camera does after we press the shutter button down all the way, it can be a single shot, a burst, a timer, we would press to the left and then make our selection. Pressing down will allow us to access our exposure compensation for the P, S, and A modes, as well as the manual mode when auto ISO is selected. Moving that tick mark in those modes to the right will brighten our image, and to the left it will darken our image, and this is reflected in the monitor preview. I'll go into much greater detail on this in another lesson. Pressing up repeatedly allows us to toggle through different monitor display options. In the middle of this wheel, there is a selection button, and this acts as an enter or a return button when we navigate menus. To the right of the shutter button, we have the C1 button, and the garbage button is also the C2 button. C stands for customizable. The default of these buttons when you get the camera are C1 will select your focusing modes, C2 is our white balance control. I will be showing you how to customize these a little later on in another lesson. Around the shutter button, we have the power switch to turn the camera on or off. The button next to where our right ring finger would rest is the lens release button. We're going to push this every time we want to take a lens off of the camera body. In the middle on the top of our camera, we have a force flash button. This will allow a very small pop-up flash to activate and can provide some very limited fill. To the right of that, we have the deep menu button. We're going to have a huge lesson on the deep menu dedicated to the most important items in there. Now this selector switch is a little confusing. I call it the opposite focus button. We see an AF and an MF, and when the lever is selected to this position, this little button is going to do the opposite of whatever we have our shutter button to do focus-wise. Let's say we have our camera and main shutter button set up to do autofocus, and for whatever reason we need to dial in precise manual focus. When the lever is pointed to AF, MF, pushing and holding this little button will do the opposite. So in this case, manual focus, and then we can dial it in precisely. If the camera is in manual focus, pushing and holding this button will tell the camera to use autofocus. So just keep this in mind. It's going to do the opposite focus-wise of whatever your halfway shutter depression is going to do. I wouldn't worry about using it too much until you have your basic controls such as exposure and basic focusing down first. If we flip the switch down, this button now becomes the Auto Exposure Lock button, which freezes our exposure settings as long as we hold it down. You will notice we also have a magnifying glass, which means that in a playback mode, this is going to allow us to zoom in and out. Next, we have the FN, or the function button, which in a shooting mode will allow us to pull up a mini menu. This menu can be customized so we can determine which items appear. You will also notice this is a send to smartphone button. The monitor is touch sensitive. This is going to be very useful when moving our focusing squares. However, at the time of this recording, it will not allow us to interact with the menu or with images during playback. However, it will flip up and face forward, which is very useful for recording vlogs or shooting selfies. Just below the primary selector, we have the video record button, and you're going to press this every time you want to record video. On the right side of the viewfinder, we have the diopter adjustment. It's very easy to miss. This allows us to change the electrical viewfinder focus if we wear glasses or contacts. On the left side of the camera, under a small door, we have our ports. Going from top to bottom, they are USB port is going to allow us to connect our camera to a computer using the cable that came with it, or to power our camera, or to charge our battery as it rests inside of the camera housing. But I would strongly suggest getting and external one so you can charge your batteries and still use your camera. Next is the mini HDMI out port, and this is going to allow us to send a video to a recorder or an external monitor. Below that, we have our microphone jack, which will allow us to feed an external microphone into the camera, very important for good audio. And beneath the camera on the right side, you have your battery and SD card slot. So that is an overview of the camera's external buttons and ports, with an introduction of their names and a short summary of what they do. If you ever forget which button does what, just come on back and we'll go over it again. For the rest of the video, we are going to discuss each of these buttons in depth, as well as how to use them in real-life shooting situations. So there's a couple things I wanted to show before we get into the overview of the camera. Depending on whether you bought your camera with a kit or not, you may or may not have an E-mount cap. The cap has this big mark on the side, and as you rotate it counterclockwise, you'll see it release right here. This white dot is going to help us align our lenses. 16 to 55 here. Might not be able to see this, but the white dots right here, we're going to line them up. And then we're going to rotate clockwise. Something I want to point out, and something that I like about Sony's, is they're designed so you can use your ring finger to hold the camera with one hand, push down on this release mechanism here, and then rotate the lens off. That's very nice. Something else I want to point out, I have the cap from this 16 to 50. And if you look very carefully under the lid, on the reverse side of it, it'll tell you the filter thread for the lens. And this is typical for most lenses, 40.5 millimeters. So what that means is that you can buy filters for your 16 to 50 lens that will actually thread in. Right here, it's very hard to see, and most lenses have threads on them. But I used this lens, the same exact lens for gimbal shots on a film because it was small and lightweight at the time. And I ended up purchasing special filters that would thread into them, and it worked out great. So just keep this in mind. Every time you want to take a lens off, you got to push and rotate counterclockwise. When you put it back on, rotate it until it clicks. You should hear us snapping. So real quick, let's talk about the battery. You should definitely buy a couple extra of these. They're small, they don't last very long when you're doing lots of video recording, and I'll make those recommendations at the end of the video. The contacts are going to face towards the camera body. Push it into here, click. This little blue lever right here is to release it. I like the SanDisk Extreme Pro memory cards, and the main thing you want to look for, these are fairly inexpensive. I mean, I think like less than $30, but you'll see a little symbol there that says U3. That means that the card is designated to sustain 4K write speeds, and these pins face the battery. So just think of the pins facing each other. Push it in until you hear it clicks. Shut the door, put the switch over, you're ready to go. This strange thing right here is a shoe. It screws into the bottom of the camera, and I use it to attach to a ball head on top of a tripod. I'll show you that real quick. I think a tripod is a phenomenal investment, and I really like ball heads for photography because they allow you to rotate in different positions and then lock it down. So this shoe, if I tilt it in and then move it back, there's a locking mechanism back here that really, I mean, it's very difficult to take this off without removing this lever, and even then I have to take the safety switch. So it really locks your camera in, and then you can put it in different positions and then lock it down. It's very useful. Highly recommend a ball head for photography. When we get into the video shooting stuff, I'll show you a different head called a fluid head that's designed more for video work. So obviously when you turn your camera on for the first time, it's going to ask you the language. We can enter the date and time. I am in the Hawaiian time zone. We don't have daylight savings here, believe it or not. I'm going to set my date and time. So something that you'll notice is that we have an app that we can connect to for our smartphone, and it's giving you some information with a QR code. We will be talking about how to connect by Wi-Fi a little bit later in the video, probably towards the end of the lesson. Brand new memory card, it's connecting, it's preparing the database, and we're ready to go. Something I want to point out is that 16 to 55 lens has a zoom switch that if you push it up and down, it's going to allow you to zoom in and out. For its size and what you're getting out of it, it's actually not that bad. I've used it in professional settings before for its size on a gimbal, as I mentioned. It's a very small, very lightweight camera with a lot of firepower. We're seeing some things, some just incredible technology coming from Sony. Their sensors are outstanding. The focusing systems are top tier for mirrorless cameras and what they're doing with their algorithms, and I'll be demonstrating this in the focusing lessons a little bit later. So when you turn the camera on for the first time and you see all these little icons, it can be very intimidating. We also have a different menu. We have this deep menu. We'll be talking about this in depth. And the one thing that I wish would happen would be to have a touch monitor that we can navigate, through the menus and stuff. We have some touch screen functionality, but it's not where I want it to be. And I'll be detailing this a little bit later. By the way, if you don't have your camera, go ahead and grab it, come on back and watch and follow along so I can point these things out. So the first thing I want you to do is to get comfortable changing your display. You can see it's written here on our directional pad, multi-selector, that as you push up, you can toggle different sets of information. This is our black information screen. There's a lot of things to learn there. And then we've looped around. So you might be asking yourself, what does all this mean? The most important things are right here on the bottom. Shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, which is set to auto right now. You're going to see something similar in the viewfinder, and something else I need to point out is that we have this little switch here, just to the left of the viewfinder, that when something is in front of it, it's going to shut this monitor off and turn the EVF on. It's a power saving feature designed to just save your battery juice. And there are ways to turn this on and off in the menu. If you're shooting from a gimbal, it makes a lot of sense to turn this off. Your exposure, or the amount of light that hits the sensor, is controlled by shutter speed and aperture. The ISO is an artificial gain or boost that is added after the light has been captured. We can change our ISO by pushing to the right on our multi-selector wheel here. Auto ISO has great applications. We'll be talking a little bit about that. And you can notice that the shutter speed and the aperture change. We'll be talking about all that stuff a little bit later. First, let me walk you through, what do all these symbols mean? This guy here is the exposure compensation. I'll explain exactly what that is. And you're also going to notice the camera is giving us some prompts to change certain settings in the P mode. I'll point that out a little bit later. In the top left-hand corner, we have our shooting mode. We have our shooting drives, which is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. We have our focusing mode. We have our focusing cluster. We have face detection. Picture profiles, these are designed for in-camera video grading. There's tons of different things we can do to our video in camera. A lot of videographers use them to prepare the video for grading that they'll add on their computers. Metering modes are how the camera measures light entering the camera. We have our white balance, derange optimizer, which is going to adjust some of the contrast of our JPEG images. Creative styles are essentially sets of instructions that we give to our camera when they create JPEGs. So when we take an image for the first time, there's raw data captured, and about 80% of that information is thrown away. Think of the creative styles as what we're telling the camera to keep. And then we have these filter effects, not really a super professional feature, but they're fun to look at. On the top of our screen, we have our memory card, number of shots remaining. This depends a lot on the type of file we have selected. Aspect ratio, number of megapixels. This is our image stabilize indicator. This fine here refers to our JPEG compression, near field communication. We have our battery life indicator and the percentage. So that's just the basic overview of the information that we see on the back camera. As we push up, we can get that to disappear. Keep pushing up. We have our histogram. The level has two parts to it. There's an up and down, which is indicated with that little orange, these two orange guys. When you get that lined up, that'll turn green. And then side to side. So if I mess this up, we lose it. Very handy when shooting landscapes. When we continue to push up on the directional pad, we get this black information screen. There's a lot of the same stuff we just talked about. There's some new things. This is the histogram. There's the level. This is our exposure compensation bar. We can see it's 5 stops on either side now. The difference here is that we can interact with these by pushing the FN button. We get this orange highlight. We can scroll over different menu items, and we can change them by pushing into the directional pad, the set button. So we can change things like our drives. Drives are what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. We have our high-speed continuous burst, we have a medium burst, a low burst, and a high plus burst. High-speed continuous burst is supposed to give us about 11 frames per second, but it's going to depend on some of our camera settings, and each of these kind of go lower in frames per second, just depending on what you're trying to do. But if you're sports shooting and you're trying to get the most out of it, either high plus or H. Self timer, 10-second timer. If we continue, anytime you see one of these little arrows on the left or right, we have more options. 5-second timer, 2-second timer, back to 10. We have a continuous timer, which means the camera is going to take multiple images after the timer finishes. 10 seconds, 3 images. You can see how it changes over here. 5 images, 5 seconds, 3 images, all kinds of combinations depending on what you're trying to do. This would be useful for like group photos. You want to take multiple images to make sure you have at least one picture where everybody has their eyes open. Coming down, we have bracketing. Bracketing means that we're giving the camera instructions to change certain settings between each shot. There is a continuous bracket and there is a single bracket. What is the difference between that? Continuous bracket means we are letting the camera take all of the images. We only have to push the shutter button down once to shoot it. Single bracket means that we have to push the shutter button down each time. So what do these numbers in here mean? 0.3 EV, 9 image. EV is an exposure value, 1/3 of a stop, 9 images. So in this case, we're telling the camera to take 9 images and to change the exposure 1/3 of a stop. I'll talk about stops a little bit later, but that's essentially what's going on. And if we see we have these arrows here, we can push left and right, and we get all kinds of combinations. I think it goes all the way up to 3 stops. Where is that? Yep. 3 stops across 5 images. So 5 images, 3 stops of difference between each 5. It's pretty amazing. And then again, we have these options for single shots, but we have to push the shutter button down each time. And then we get bracketing for white balance between low and high in our dynamic range optimizer, low and high. So that is a quick overview of the drive modes available. Coming back out to the menu, we have our metering modes. We'll be talking about that in depth. White balance. We have our flash control. Talk a little bit about that. Pretty much all the stuff, creative controls. We have our focusing clusters, face detection. We have our filter effects, aspect ratio, picture profiles. We have our silent shooting. When you turn this on, we will get no mechanical shutter. It's going to shoot electronic. We can get 8 frames continuous focus, I think, on the high-speed burst for silent shooting. Just keep in mind that if you see some... In fact, we might be able to pull this off. Let's just take a look at it real quick. Take a picture. See if we can get some banding going here. There it is. Banding. If you see this, I'm shooting with an LED light now in my living room on these white blinds. This is an artifact very common with electronic shutters. So if you see this, your camera's not broken. In electronic shutter mode, there's this defect created, and the way to get around that is to shoot with a mechanical shutter. So unfortunately, if you're using, if you're shooting in LED lit conditions, so let's play that. So that's LED silent shutter, that's mechanical shutter. Very common complaint. It's just one of those things. We also have our quality. We can control whether it's RAW or JPEG in RAW. So tons of information, but this FN menu, the function menu, or the black info screen that I sometimes call it, I think it's more helpful to have access to most of those menu items while you're shooting in this original screen that we started with. So if you push the FN button here, we can toggle it on or off. So the cool thing about this is there's a way to customize this according to our tastes. With time, you're going to have a preference for changing certain things. But there's some other things in here that you may or may not want. You may not want your flash compensation. You may not want creative styles or JPEGs or your shooting mode here. So the way you change these is you come into the menu, press the deep menu button. We have our purple tab, page 8 out of 9, and you're going to come to the function menu set. Going to hit that, and you can see the different kinds of information that we can swap out. So if you didn't want flash compensation, you can come in here and pick from many pages, all kinds of different things. If you want audio signals, tap the shutter button, see if it'll show up in shooting mode. So the beep mode is now on. It's basically the beep mode. If you didn't want that, you can come back in, select it, and we'll go back to flash mode, or flash compensation. There it is. So that is how you can customize this for your function menu. So something I need to point out about the function menu is that when we rotate to the video mode, I'm just flipping this over to the video mode, get our crop, press the FN, you can see that we've lost some of these features, and that's because those are stills features only. And so the idea on this is that the function menu is going to be the same whether you're for stills or video. I think this should be a separate one when you flip over the video icon, but there's nowhere to change that in the menu. So if we come into the menu, it's just one function menu set. So something I should point out is that when you press the play button, and again push up on our display, we can toggle through different sets of information specifically about the picture. So we can see which white balance, which creative control, our dynamic range optimizer, the folder, the file number, the focal length, ISO. So just know it's there. If you are a brand new or an intermediate photographer, this next lesson is probably the most important on this video, and this has to do with exposure control. Exposure, as you remember, is the amount of light that hits the sensor. So we're talking about how do we control how much light is entering into the camera. So we have this thing called the mode dial up here, and as we rotate this, you can see the modes are changing. We get P, A, S, and M. Those are the ones we're going to start off with. And the easiest way for me to explain this is talking about the A mode first. A stands for Aperture Priority. And in this mode, when we rotate our main control wheel, or dial, this is going to change our aperture. So it's changing the size or the diameter of the opening in terms of how much light, a lot of light or a teeny amount of light. And as we rotate this and we get to a higher number, what's happening is the aperture is getting smaller and smaller, and as we go the other direction and open it, it's getting wider and wider. It's letting more light in. There's something interesting happening here that if you are very keen to observe, you should be asking, if I'm changing the aperture, how come the brightness doesn't change? Okay, so what's happening in aperture priority mode is that we determine the aperture and the camera determines the shutter speed. We can see it changing right here. And what's happening is the camera is making adjustments automatically for us, so we don't have to worry about it. This can be very handy in certain shooting conditions. So when I was a wedding photographer, if I was shooting in a dark chapel, here comes the bride and groom and we're walking out, now they're in the foyer, now they're outdoors and it's bright and sunny, I didn't have time to change my shutter speed. So in those situations, I would let the camera handle it and I could focus on composition and not tripping and things of that nature. Certain sports shooters like to shoot in aperture priority mode. Why? Because they don't have to worry about dialing in the shutter speed. So if you are a beginning or an intermediate photographer, my recommendation is to start off on aperture priority. It means that you are going to pick the aperture, the camera is going to handle the shutter speed. So what I want you to do now, we're going to do this little exercise. So I want you to take a picture of a wall or something and just look at it. Okay, so it's nice, even exposure, it should be. And now what we're going to start talking about is exposure compensation. It's a fancy way of saying changing the brightness. Exposure compensation can be accessed by pushing down on our directional pad. See this plus minus sign? That is the universal symbol for exposure compensation. So when we push this down, we get this crazy little bracket that shows up. All I want you to learn right now, to try, is to move that over to +1 and take another picture. Now what I want you to do is to compare this picture with the first one you took. I'm doing this by just touching back and forth on the directional pad. So the first one is darker and the second one's brighter, right? So this is how we change image brightness. If this is the only lesson that you come away from tonight with this exposure compensation, changing the image brightness, you are well on your way to becoming an excellent photographer. So that is a great exercise, is practice changing the brightness of your image by shooting in Aperture Priority mode, pushing down to get exposure compensation, go at +2, and then try one at -2. What do you think is going to happen? See how dark it is? So when we compare those, really dark, really bright, even. So exposure compensation, there's the even. Exposure compensation is giving the camera instructions to change the brightness. So the question you may be asking is, how does that happen? So I want to show you this. This is pretty cool. We're going to put it back on an even exposure, hit the set button. I'm going to open up my aperture as wide as I can, 3.5. Look at the shutter speed, 1/200th of a second. So now check this out. We're going to go to +1. Now look at the shutter speed, 1/100th of a second. So what's happening is when we engage exposure compensation, we're telling the camera to shift the shutter speed to make it twice as bright. How do I know that? 1/100th of a second is twice as long as 1/200th of a second. Why? Because if you take 1/200th of a second and you add it to itself, you get 2/200ths of a second. So if we simplify that, 2/200ths of a second is 1/100th of a second. So this shutter speed is twice as long as the first one. So check this out. Let's go to +2. You're probably wondering, what do these little numbers mean? Each number refers to a stop. So every full stop is twice the amount of light. What do you think the shutter speed is going to be on this one? Think about it. If you said 1/50th of a second, you were absolutely correct. So what do you think +3 stops would be? If +2 was 1/50th, if you said 1/25th of a second, you're absolutely correct. So this is the heart of the matter with exposure compensation, is we're giving the camera instructions to shift the brightness based on the shutter speed. So the original is 1/200th of a second. If we go in the other direction, now we want a shutter speed that is twice as fast than 1/200th of a second. If you said 1/400th of a second, you are absolutely correct. If you can get this one principle down tonight, exposure compensation is changing brightness, and this is how it works, you have cleared a huge hurdle in terms of photography. I want to show you something else. See, the fun never ends with Michael the Maven. So I want you to take your hand, and I want you to put it in front of your lens on Aperture Priority mode and watch what happens to the shutter speed. See it changing? So what's happening is the camera is constantly measuring the amount of light that enters through the lens, and it is making adjustments as you shoot, as lighting conditions change, and exposure compensation would be respected in those conditions. So there are a couple words of warning I have to give you about Aperture Priority. There's a temptation just to, dial in the aperture and start shooting, but you should sneak a peek over at your shutter speed depending on what you are shooting, because the shutter speed does matter. And if you get into very, very slow shutter speeds, let's say 1/30th of a second, and you're attempting to take a picture of a person, it's probably going to be blurry. Why? Because we move holding the camera, and our subjects often move as well. Even if they're just sitting there breathing, they're moving a little bit. So the safe shutter speed that I recommend for portraits really is around 1/60th of a second if you're good. If you're a pure beginner and you can't hold the camera super steady, maybe 1/100th or 1/125th of a second for portraits. If you are a sports shooter shooting moving athletes, I think the shutter speed you really need to have is at least 1/500th of a second. This is my personal preference. If they are fast athletes, it might be more, 1/1000th, maybe 1/2000th of a second. Just depends on what you're shooting. But the absolute minimum for a fast moving subject in my world is 1/500th of a second. So the question you should be asking yourself is, if we're in an indoor shooting situation like we are now, basketball game, let's say, how do we get a faster shutter speed? The way we do this is we are going to bump up our ISO. Remember, ISO is gain. It's a boost that we're giving to the light. So look, shutter speeds changed. Went from 800 to 1600. We've doubled our shutter speed. Let's double our ISO and see what happens. 3200, 1/800th of a second. So that is a very important concept, and you're going to be bumping up your ISO in low light situations. If you don't know what ISO does, let me show it to you real quick. We're going to use an outrageous ISO to really exaggerate this. And then I'm going to stop my aperture down, and we're going to take a picture and take a look at it. And we're going to zoom in. So you can see we have all this, I don't know if you can see it very well. Let's see here. You can see that better. So we have all this grain, not pleasing at all. Now let's take our ISO, turn it way down. Let's go to 800 again. We'll open up our aperture, take another picture, zoom in, and you can see this is far cleaner. So that's the trade-off with ISO, is that as we add this gain, the image can become noisy, and as you get really, really high, it's definitely going to be noisy. And there's certain limits. Sony sensors are actually pretty good, and you're going to be able to get away with some higher ISOs. Just depends on your subject matter. Just take a look at it as you're shooting. But that is the trade-off of ISO, is the higher it goes, the more grain you're going to get. So having said all this stuff, let's take a look at shutter priority, which is different than aperture priority in that we change the shutter speed, and the camera is going to be changing the aperture. So we change the primary setting for that mode, shutter priority. We change the shutter, camera changes the aperture. So let's say we're at a sporting event, and we're trying to get that 1/500th of a second, and we dial this in, and you see this. Aperture's flashing. This means the camera is not happy. What the camera is saying is that it cannot open the lens more. It cannot open it. It's physically limited. It's not going to be able to pull off the exposure you desire. That's what it's trying to say. So how would you try to solve this? Think about it for just a second. If you said, bump the ISO up, you're absolutely correct. Let's turn that up quite a bit. Camera is no longer complaining. You can shoot at 1/500th of a second at f5, and you're going to be good to go. That is another critical skill if you are using shutter priority mode. In the exposure compensation side of this, the adjustment is going to happen to the aperture. There it is at 7.1. Here it is at 5.0, so that's one stop of difference. If we try to bump it up and the lens can't physically open that far, we're right at the border right now. See, now it's not happy. Can't open it wide enough. So that's the thing you have to kind of keep in mind on shutter priority, is the physical limitations of the lens. Let's take a look at program mode. Program mode, you can see that it's trying to tell us we can change some of these settings. And program mode in certain situations can be good. If you're really intimidated, it could be a good place to start. But what it's trying to do is to give us different combinations of both aperture and shutter speed. One of the problems with program mode is often beginners will come in and they'll set their camera to something like this, something crazy, f22 with a shutter speed of 1/25th of a second, and they'll go out and they'll take pictures and they won't understand why all their images are blurry. It's because of the slow shutter speed. Even worse at 1/500, look at that, 1/5 of a second. So what I recommend is that if you do shoot on program mode, just keep an eye on that shutter speed. 1/60th, 1/100th of a second for handheld shooting is a good place to start. We can also change our exposure compensation, but the camera is going to make its own determinations in terms of where this happens. We can adjust our ISO if we want to give it more range. Program mode has a time and place, but I hardly ever use it. Now let's talk about manual mode. My rule of thumb for manual mode is I only use it if I have enough time to dial in my settings. If I'm pressed for time at an event, typically Aperture Priority mode. I also use manual mode almost exclusively in studio settings where we have strobes, models, and we're just trying to dial it in precisely. In the manual mode, we change our aperture by rotating our main control wheel. We can change our shutter speed by rotating, just simply rotating this main dial on our directional pad. So this is adjusting our shutter speed. Now, as we go for exposure compensation, you're going to notice we get locked out and it's saying this is unavailable. You have to be in auto ISO for exposure compensation to work. So let's talk about auto ISO real quick. To access it, we're going to come into ISO and we're going to push up until we get to ISO auto. And it is exactly like it sounds. We're basically giving the camera permission to change the ISO. An example of when this would be useful is if we were shooting an indoor, let's say, boxing match, and we had a very specific shutter speed that we wanted. Let's say 1/500th of a second. We had our aperture locked in, but there were still changing lighting conditions with all these lights coming on and off, and that can be very difficult to control. It can happen spontaneously, so set the ISO to auto, turn that over to the camera, and let the camera adjust the ISO settings from shot to shot. That would be one example of how to use auto ISO. And I know people who love it. So you come up a little higher, and we have this thing called multi-frame noise reduction. And if we come over and select this, we can go standard or high. We can also choose the exact ISO that we want, or we can turn it over to auto ISO. And what's happening in multi-frame noise reduction is the camera is going to take multiple images, stack them together, and reduce the noise based on that stack. My understanding is this is how the Pixel 3 works in night mode. It's taking multiple images and it's basically adding those exposures together and reducing the noise through different kinds of processing. Let's try it out. It sounded like 5 images, some writing going on, and then we get a final image. So if you're in a situation where you want to try to reduce your ISO noise, probably very high ISO, your subject matter isn't moving, that might be a fun feature to try out. Auto ISO is also available on your other shooting modes, just so you know. Let's turn this back to like 800 or 1000. You're going to notice that we have some other modes on the mode dial. Let's talk about these real quick. The green auto mode, I affectionately call the dummy mode. When you turn it on auto, you're essentially turning your camera into a point and shoot. We have some things we can change in here, maybe our drive mode, our focusing mode. It's really designed to take almost all the settings away from you, and we can use smartphones this way. You didn't buy this camera to use it as a point and shoot. So I tell beginners to stay away from it. Don't use the dummy mode if you can help it. If we continue to rotate and we come to this SCN, the scene mode, let's see if it lets us change down here. You can come in here, and the idea on scene mode is, and we see this with all camera companies, they pretty much have these, is the camera companies that's saying, what do you want to shoot? Okay, a person. So if you select this, the camera is going to pick the creative picture style, so to speak. It's going to pick the shutter speed. It's going to try to do most of the heavy lifting for you. We don't have those controls. We can't change them. And this is why I don't recommend using this, is because you're going to want to tweak something and you're not going to be able to. And I see this as kind of a dead end. Sport shooting, macro, landscape, sunset, night scene, handheld twilight, night portrait, anti-motion blur. Most of these kinds of shooting can be done with the modes I've shown you if you understand how the camera operates, and you're going to get far more control over them. So I tell my students to not use the scene mode as well. In a perfect world, if you're one of my students, I would say Aperture Priority mode, manual mode. Those are the two still shooting modes that you should focus on. So we also have this Panorama mode, which is just like it sounds. We would take a sweeping shot of a landscape holding the shutter button down in the direction of the arrow, and sometimes they can be really great. In fact, I use this if I don't have a super wide angle lens, like with, let's say I had a 24 or even a 35. You can use panorama mode and get away with some crazy stuff, and it's really not that bad, but that's just another feature I will demonstrate on the full crash course. We'll take you down to the beach and I'll show you it in action. So what is this MR on the top of our button? Memory and memory recall. This allows us to essentially save certain camera settings in memory so we don't have to redial this in every single time. So one example of this would be a scuba diving photographer. Once the camera goes into a housing, it's not always the easiest thing to change settings. You might have to tweak your white balance, your picture style, your creative styles, the focusing mode, things of that nature. And so what they'll do is they'll come out to their regular shooting mode or in manual mode. They'll get it all set up the way they want with all their individual settings. So we're going to come into our menu, red tab, page 4, MR 1 and 2 memory. Come in here and we're going to tell the camera to remember the settings that we've dialed in position 1. So when I hit save, or the set button, it's going to register it. And then when I flip the dial over to MR, I can come in and those settings are saved. So we have multiple positions for this. Look how many. 2, 3, 7 of them. So just by coming in and setting these up, which one you want. When you come in and select one of these numbers, your MR mode will select that number. So let's say we select number 3. And we go back to manual mode. We flip it back to MR. There it is, it's 3. It's giving us the chance to change it, but this indicator right here, 1, 2, 3, it shows position 3 highlighted. The other ones, the M1 through 4, you have to come in here to the menu and select them. So let's just pick M1. Come back out to shoot, we'll go to manual mode, back to MR, and it kind of resets. So these are the ones that are going to be remembered. These are not when you change between modes. So we really have 7 memory positions, which is outstanding. Let's talk about white balance. There is a short answer to this, and there is a much longer philosophy of use answer to this that I talk about on the crash course. I'm going to give you the short answer. If you are a pure beginner, set your camera to auto white balance. We can do this by pressing the C2 button. There it is, AWB, auto white balance. Start off with this until you get a hang of your exposure settings. And what's going to happen is you're eventually going to notice the color looks off in certain shooting situations. When you start to notice that and you're feeling frustrated, what you need to do is to come into your white balance and try to pick the icon matching the situation that you're shooting in. For example, sun white balance is the sun icon. We have shade, cloud cover, incandescent light. Look how blue it is. We have fluorescent light. Different types of fluorescent light, warm white, cool white, daylight. We have flash white balance. We have underwater white balance. Something I really appreciate about Sony cameras is because the white balance underwater gets really weird. We have Kelvin white balance. We have 3 different custom white balances. So what's happening here is basically our human eyes are really good at adjusting to different types of light sources. It happens automatically. We don't think about it. Camera sensors are a little bit different. They need to know the color of the light we're shooting in. Camera sensors see this differently. They see it as more shades of blue and yellow. And that's basically what's happening, is that it's adding a little bit of color in certain shooting situations. So I'm going to talk more about the philosophy of this when we get into the crash course. But real quick, let's talk about Kelvin temperature, and then we'll talk about custom white balance. Tell you what, let's talk about custom white balance first. Custom white balance allows us to take a picture of something white, giving the camera instructions that, hey, this is white, adjust the white balance accordingly. So when we come into custom white balance, we have this arrow pointing to the right. We can push set when it's highlighted. Press the set button, that's this guy right here, to capture data of the central area of the screen. So when I was shooting weddings, sometimes this would happen. We would get mixed light. It'd be fluorescent light and tungsten light, a little bit of shade, and in the corner there'd be some sunlight coming in. How does the camera know what the color temperature is? take a picture of the bride's dress, or a white wall, or a white ceiling, or a white piece of paper, in this case the blinds, push the set button, the camera's measuring the whiteness, and it's basically telling you, okay, you are in this Kelvin temperature, and then we hit enter, come into our FN, there it is, there's our white balance setting right here. We can change it as well. So white balance is going to be really critical if you are shooting JPEGs or if you are shooting video. Video is a form of JPEG. So because it's JPEG and all this information is being thrown away, we have to make sure it's correct. It's not so easy to change color if it's really messed up in post-production. So far more important for videographers and if you're shooting JPEG. If you're shooting RAW and you have all that original data and information, it's not quite as important. Why? Because we can usually process that out. So that's some of the train of thought there. Let's talk about real quick the Kelvin white balance. Kelvin allows us to manually input the temperature of the light we're shooting in. So daylight is typically around 5600 Kelvin. These Kelvins I'll explain in the crash course what they are, what they mean. But the idea is that you come in here and adjust this up and down. And we know it's 4800 because that's what the custom white balance told us. You see how it's getting more neutral? And so as we turn this down, it becomes more and more blue at lower temperatures. And then at very high temperatures, the appearance is more and more orange or yellow. And what's happening is the camera is adding color to counterbalance the temperature that we're shooting in. Something else that we can do is if we continue to push to the right, you see this little arrow right here, we get the ability to actually shift the color white balance in blue to the left, amber to the right, green above, and magenta below. So this is allowing us to tweak the color of the white balance itself. I very rarely use it, although I have used it before on Sony cameras to make it a little bit more cooler in certain situations, but very rarely. If you're a beginning or intermediate photographer, I would say stay away from this for now. We're going to cancel out of that and come back out and stick with this guy for now. Let's talk about our camera's metering modes. Metering modes determine how the camera measures light. If you remember when we were taking our hand and putting it in front of the camera, this is how it works. The camera is looking for patterns of light to measure. And the easiest thing I can do to explain this is in the beginning, if you're a pure beginner, stay on this mode right here, the multi-mode. But the easiest way for me to explain this is in the spot metering mode. So basically what I did is I selected spot metering mode, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little circle that appeared in our viewfinder. And what's happening is the camera is measuring light specifically within that circle. So if you'll notice the shutter speed here, 1/320th of a second, 3.5 ISO. Watch what happens when I move this over this headlamp that I set up. Everything gets dark. Because why? The camera is only looking in this one spot. It's recommending a shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second. In the instant we move that circle just off a little bit, boom, it's looking at the blinds. It's totally ignoring the light now. It's looking at the blinds behind it. And so that is the heart of the matter with metering, is we're instructing the camera to look at certain parts of the frame. Now, if we come back into our metering mode, I'm accessing it through the FN, the function menu, and we come back in, you'll see we have these two little arrows off to the side. And if we push to the right, we get large. What does that look like? Well, it's just a bigger circle now. There it is. And it is sampling a greater area. And it's noticing that this isn't as bright as the rest, and therefore we don't need a shutter speed that fast. If you are a pure beginner, what I recommend is starting off with this. The default is the multi-metering mode. And what's happening here is the camera is breaking up the entire frame into patterns and is trying to figure out, what's bright and it's trying to figure out what the average exposure of your subject matter should be. Let's talk about some of the other ones. That's a good place to start, simply because if it's overexposed, you can turn your exposure compensation down. If it's underexposed, you can bump it up. And for the most part, it's going to be pretty good. Center-weighted metering mode is really a combination of the multi and the spot. It's essentially giving some priority to the center, but it does look at the entire frame. Entire screen averaging is just like it sounds. It's looking at the entire frame and it's averaging all of the subject matter in terms of the brightness to get a recommended exposure setting. And this last one is fairly new. It's called the highlight metering mode. Essentially, we're giving permission to the camera to make the recommendation based on the highlights. If you have something very, very bright, if you are shooting in a nightclub or at a concert where your subject maybe have bright lights on them and the background's dark, this might be a fun mode to try. Something I want to point out that's pretty cool we can do with Sony cameras is just when we go to the spot metering mode and we have this circle, we can actually tie this to our focusing point. And so the way we do that is we have to come into our menu. We're going to be on page 8, spot metering point. We can determine whether it'll be at the center or we can link it to our focusing point. The focusing cluster, I'm going to go to a single point. And now what you can see is that circle is tied to my focusing point and I can move it around. So the spot metering mode can be specifically tied to our focusing square if we have a single square like this. And of course we can obviously move it around with the touch screen. So that is a very powerful technique to link the spot metering mode with our individual focusing square. To revert, just come back in, turn it to center, and we've separated those two again. It's time to tackle our camera's focusing modes. And if this is your first camera, it can be very intimidating. Sony cameras are very complex, they're very powerful in terms of focusing systems, and there's a lot to get lost in. So the easiest way to think about this is the how, the when, and the where the camera is focusing. How, when, and where. If you focus on those concepts, no pun intended, everything's going to be fine. So out of the box, how does the camera focus? Well, we talked about it. It's with a halfway shutter button depression. Push the shutter button halfway down, it focuses. This is indicated with this green dot in the bottom left-hand corner. We also get these 4 box corners. Push it down all the way. Camera takes the picture. It's pretty straightforward. That's the default method. I'll be talking about some other things in a second. So now let's talk about when the camera is focusing. We can access our camera's focusing modes. Default is the C1 button. I think that's a pretty good place for it. Oh, doesn't like something I've done here. We have this AF/MF control. I'm going to push that in. Push it again. There it is. We'll talk about that in just a second. AFS stands for autofocus single shot. And it's just like it sounds. It means the camera is going to get a focusing lock one time. And as long as we hold the shutter button halfway down, the focus will not change. It's locked. And there are some powerful techniques referred to as recomposing. Basically means we can get a focusing lock, hold the shutter button halfway down, and we can recompose the scene to make it more visually pleasing. One-time focus. Autofocus continuous is different in that the camera is going to focus over and over and over again. It is a repetitive, continuous focus, and you'll notice that the icon changed. Here in the bottom left-hand corner, we get these green parentheses around the circle. We also do not get a beep. What's happening is the camera is focusing repeatedly. This is going to be ideal for moving subjects, such as a bird in flight, maybe an athlete, somebody swimming, somebody running. Ideal for sports shooting. So typically what you need to be on. Autofocus automatic mode basically means we're giving permission to the camera to switch back and forth between those first two modes. If the subject is still, it's going to be autofocus single. If it's moving, it's going to be autofocus continuous. There were a lot of times when I was shooting weddings, I would rely on AFA. Not so much anymore. I usually dial it in right off the bat. Manual focus is exactly what it sounds like. The camera is not helping us. We have to rely on the manual focus ring on our lens, and I have some other tools turned on right now, such as the Magnify Assist, which is a magnification, and it's automatically punching in wherever our focusing square is. So when I am in manual focus and I rotate that ring, it's going to punch in. DMF stands for direct manual focus, and this is going to be a hybrid between autofocus single and manual focus. The way it works is that we push a shutter button halfway down, we get focus lock, and then holding the shutter button halfway down, if we rotate our focus ring on our lens, we now have the ability to dial in manual focus. So this allows us to get focus lock, and we can fine tune it a little bit further with the manual focusing ring. So that is the when the camera is focusing, whether it's a single, continuous, or a manual type of focus. Now let's talk about the where the camera is focusing. There's two parts to this. I refer to the camera's focusing squares as clusters. So using the touch monitor, we can touch on the screen and designate where we want to move the focusing square. That's one way we can do it, and there's some other ways I am going to show you after a short discussion. For now, let's just say touching on the monitor will allow us to position the squares. I'm also going to come in here and go back to single shot focus. So to access our camera's focusing clusters, we're going to use our function button, and we're going to come over right here, focus area. You can see we get tons of different options. If you do not want to choose where the camera is focusing, you just want to turn it over, you would go with focus area wide. And what's going to happen is the camera is going to be looking for an area of contrast, and it's going to pick it out. So we can see those individual focusing points being used. Push down all the way to take the picture. Zone means that we are choosing a smaller area that we're telling the camera to look in. So something very interesting happened there in that I'm able to now use this directional pad. And there's a trick to this, that when you see this select focus point on off, this is going to allow us to move with the directional pad if we need to, and to turn it off, we would press the set button. So why would you want to do that? Well, we still need access to these other menu items. We've got our drives, we have our exposure compensation. So the question then becomes, if you were shooting through the viewfinder and you wanted to move this square around again, how would you do that? And it's going to take a little bit of a discussion I'll come to in just a second. The zone focusing cluster allows us to limit the area the camera is looking in. Push the shutter button halfway down, and it's going to find an area of contrast in there. There is a great trick to this when you are vlogging, and this is what I use in my camera setups, most of them on YouTube. You'll find me usually speaking on one side, and I'll put pictures and titles and things of that nature. This is the mode that I use, but I use it in conjunction with face detection. I'll show you that in just a second. Center focusing square. It's a single square, and basically we're locked into the center. I know there are a lot of sports shooters that prefer to shoot with this. It's this preference. You cannot move this. Next, we have our Flexable Spot. It says M for medium. If we push to the left and right, we can get different sizes. There's large, small, and medium. So if we take a look at the large, you can see that it's big. It's giving us this prompt that we can still move it around if we want. Let's take a look at some of the other sizes. Small. Look how small and precise that is. So if you were a macro photographer or you wanted very precise focusing, you could use the small. And we also have medium. I use medium and large for a lot of sports shooting. Usually it's pretty much on large, but it just depends on what I'm doing, what kind of lenses I'm using. Put that focusing square over my subject. It's great that I can touch on the screen, right? Pretty fast. This is very fast touching on this, obviously, but there are some problems with this I'll outline in just a second. So that is our flexible focusing square. Expand Flexable Spot gives the camera permission to look around the center square if it cannot find a subject of contrast in the middle. It does exactly like it sounds, looking for the spot, if there's nothing in there, let's see if we can get it to work. We will look just outside. There it goes. In order for me to show you this last one, I have to change my focusing mode. So if you see this, then it's not highlighted tracking. It wants us to use autofocus continuous, for example. Come back in. I don't know how it's possible for a beginner to know all this stuff. It's just so technical. So the idea on tracking is that when we select our subject, see this little box with the two lines on the side? We know it's servo because we get the parentheses. And so the idea is that if you hold the shutter button halfway down, it is going to track that subject. The focusing systems on the A6400 are really, really good. Among the best I have ever seen for a mirrorless camera. I need to go out and do some tests side by side. But they appear to be improved over the A7 III, which were really good. You know, so if they hold up to the testing, we're probably looking at one of the best mirrorless focusing cameras in the world at the time of this recording. And so that's how the tracking works, is it's going to get that lock and hold on to it. So something you'll notice are these arrows to the left and right. And as we toggle through them, you're going to see all the clusters we talked about: wide, zone, center, flexible spot, small, medium, large, expand, flexible spot, and wide. So it's essentially applying tracking, if you're an autofocus continuous, to that focusing cluster. Let's come back here. Pretty good. So that is the where the camera is focusing. It's the focusing clusters as well as how to position them. So a very common question is, how do we do back button focusing? We want to remove focus from the halfway shutter button depression. That's done by coming into the menu. We're on first red tab, page 6. Turn this to off. That's going to remove the autofocus from the halfway shutter button depression. And then we would need to designate this guy to be our autofocus. We don't have a lot of real estate in terms of custom buttons and things of that nature, so you know, it's going to come down to personal preference and what you want. Autofocus on. There it is. So once it's set up like this, now we are focusing with this back button. We get focus and we can fire away. Some people will ask, why would you want to do this? This allows us to control specifically when autofocus is engaged, and when we lift our thumb up, it's disengaged, which means no matter where our focusing square is, when we push it halfway down on its way to the shutter, the camera will not refocus. And sports photographers like to do it to recompose and things of that nature. So that's how we set up back button focus. If we wanted to change this to something else, we could do that. Head it to this. We'd come back into page 6. If you forget that you've done this, which I've done that before, I'm like, why is my shutter button not working? So let's talk about face and eye detection. Those are two different things. I'm going to bump up the ISO because when you notice the shutter speed gets low at certain focal lengths, look what's happening. We get this flashing. See how it's turned off? That's warning you that the image stabilization probably isn't going to be enough to stabilize. So if you ever see that flashing, that's what's going on. I'll just turn that off for now. So what's going on here is we see this box around our model's face. This gorgeous model showed up to help us out. This is face detection being turned on within the focusing cluster we are using. So let me explain what that means. Focusing square is over here. If I push the shutter button halfway down, the focusing has the preference over here. If the focusing square and the face detection match up, now it's focusing on my eye. It's detecting an eye. I'll talk about that in a second. So keep this in mind. This is a very powerful technique in video modes. I'm going to demonstrate this real quick. So if I come over to the video mode, what I'm going to do is that there's my face detection, and I'm going to turn on, I do this all the time when I'm shooting videos for YouTube, is I'll pick a zone for the camera to look for a face. So any faces or anything over here is going to be disregarded. And so this continual autofocus is going to, so I can be walking around, I can be talking. And if you're an autofocus continuous, the camera is going to do an amazing job of tracking. It's as good as Canon's dual pixel autofocus. It's that good. It's just amazing. So for video, this is very powerful. For still shooting, very powerful. Come all the way over. We have the zone. I push the shutter button halfway down and it's jumping into eye detection. Having said that, default, when you get the camera, if you just want to go with eye detection, push the center button in your multi-selector wheel, and that is the default control for eye detection. Sony revolutionized portrait photography, in my opinion, for wedding photographers and portrait photographers with this introduction of eye detection. Back in the day when I shot weddings, we would have to, choose a focusing square, like a single square, basically. And we would have to move it over our subject. We have to get a focus lock. And if we wanted to recompose, if it was at wide apertures, we would be pulling them out of focus. And we want the eyes to be very sharp. So what Sony did is they basically invented this eye detection stuff where we get this amazing, precise, accurate, fast jumps onto it, and it's allowing photographers to have a higher number of keepers and to get through their workflow faster. It's great. Everybody else is trying to catch up right now. Canon, Nikon, Fuji's getting pretty close. Everybody else is trying to get eye detection. Sony is the best right now. So there's a couple important notes about this. You can turn off face detection. You don't see it out here, but if we come into our black function menu, I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you. There it is. That is referred to as face priority in autofocus. If we turn this off and we come back out, you notice that the face detection box is now gone. If we are far away from our subject, far away enough, let me show you what happens when we turn it back on. So red tab, page 6, second item. We've turned off, there it is, face priority in AF. We're going to turn it back on. So when I push the eye detection in, wow, it's just super precise. I'm very impressed. Yeah, Sony's killing it right now. I did some focusing tests and you won't see this on any other camera, how precise that is. So I can shoot from there. So at some point, it's not going to be able to get an eye detection. We can come into our face and eye AF set. We can determine whether we want it to be the right eye or the left eye, depending on how you're shooting. Auto will allow the camera to choose. This frame is the gray frame that we saw. You can turn it on or off. It's a bunch of information on face detection. Some of you may be asking or wondering if there's a way to add this to our FN menu. I think this bottom right-hand corner is a pretty good candidate because it's our shooting mode, right? We know what that is on the mode dial. So if we come in to our purple tab, let's set this up real quick. Function menu set. And we're looking for face priority in AF. Oh. Here it is right here. Did you see the other one? We could do which eye we wanted. Left or right eye select. There it is. So when we come back out to our shooting mode, FN, there's our face detection. So now we have a quick, easy way to turn it on or off. So keep in mind that when you have face detection turned on, if your focusing cluster or square isn't matched up on it, it's going to prioritize to the square. When there is overlap, it's going to prioritize to face or eye detection if you have it turned on. So I need to demonstrate a few other focusing techniques, specifically manual focusing. So I'm going to turn this off for now. So let's go into our manual focusing mode and let me demonstrate some of these other tools that we can find in our menu. So we're going to go to our red tab. Here it is. There's a bunch of great tools in here. Focus Magnifier does exactly what it says. It's going to allow us to magnify in. I'm pushing the set button. Goes to almost 6 and then to almost 12. This could be something you can add to your function menu if it's something you use a lot. I think it's very handy. The focus magnify time. So when we punched in like that, do you want it to be for 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or no limit? Anytime we punch in like that. The initial focus magnification could be 1, or we can start with 5:9. There's some other magnifying tools we'll talk about here. Autofocus in focus magnification. It's turned on. It wants us to be on. Let's turn this guy on to single. Let's demonstrate this. Focus magnifier. Camera's focusing. There it is. So it allows us to focus in a close magnification. Manual focus assist, when this is turned on, it basically means that when we use our manual focusing ring, it's going to punch in. See here, there it is. It allows us to use the focusing ring. Did you guys see what I did there? This AF/MF button, tell you what that is in just a second. And then we also have our peaking display. Peaking is a color overlay. I like red because it's really easy to see. We'll turn it on, and we'll turn it on high to make this, there it is, nice and bright. So if we come in, even in our zoom, we can see the peaking. So if you want to get precise focusing lock, zoom in, use peaking. Peaking works pretty well, but don't rely on it too much. See, it's like a little bit off right here, a little bit more precise there. It's essentially looking for an area of contrast, and it's telling you where that is, but that's not always where the most, sharp focus is. It's a good tool. A lot of people like to use it on medium or low. It's not quite as intense, but let me put something out here real quick. So I have a pretty small aperture at 5.6. It's saying that it can get both of them in focus. And this is one challenge, that if you have your focus magnify assist tool on, it's always going to punch in. So there are times you're going to want to turn it off. And now we do not punch in, and we can see our target is in focus, but our face model is not. Now our face model is more in focus. Very powerful tool for videographers if you want to see where your camera's focusing, basically. But it takes some time to learn all these tools and to get used to turning things on and off, things of that nature. Peaking is a fantastic tool. I'm going to turn it off for now. Remember, it works in manual focus only, and it also works on the zoom. So let's talk about this little guy that I had pressed here. By default, this is going to be autofocus to manual focus. If you want to jump quickly to manual focus, you would push this. Now I'm in manual focus. Now I'm in autofocus. Now I'm in manual focus. And that's the idea of it. Let's just turn these on so we can see. Autofocus, manual focus. This back button is going to be used depending on what your preference is. If you're a sports shooter, you're probably going to have this for back button focusing. If you are a portrait photographer like me, you may be doing this. You may have it set up to something else. You're going to probably end up customizing this in some way. And there is a little problem. There are a few problems I have to point out. So let's talk about some of the problems you're going to be facing. For example, as a sports shooter, if you're looking through the viewfinder, how are you going to change your focusing squares? There's not a joystick, and when we push in on our directional pad in the default mode, it's going to be accessing different menu things. We don't have direct access to moving the square around. So there's a couple things we can do. In the menu, in the yellow tab, page 3, we have this touch operation. So this basically, the touch operation is talking about the back monitor. If we turn this off, nothing's happening. I think it's a great feature. I wouldn't recommend turning it off unless there's a problem. So we have this feature called Touch Panel, Touch Pad. The touch panel and the touch pad are both this back monitor, depending on whether or not you are looking through the viewfinder. When you are looking through the viewfinder, it is referred to as the pad. When you have it on the main monitor, it's referred to as the panel. So when this is turned to panel and pad, that means this touch monitor is active whether you're looking through the viewfinder or just looking on the back monitor. If you turn it to touch panel only, what that means is only when this monitor is on, it is active. When you look through the viewfinder, it will not work. And then we have the touch pad only, meaning that when you look through the viewfinder, then this becomes active. The reason why I go through the trouble to explain this is because if you are right eye dominant, meaning your right eye is here and your nose is just off to the left of the camera and your nose isn't bumping into the monitor, we can use this to position our focusing squares. It's very fast, it's very effective. So as you're looking through the viewfinder, your right thumb is going to come in. It's a natural position. You can touch and drag very quickly. And we can designate the area that is active by coming in. We can make it active in the vertical orientation as well, or you can turn it off if you want. We can talk about the relative or the absolute position. I like the absolute position a little bit more. I think it's faster. This is going to come down to preference. Yeah, let's turn it on for now. And we can also choose the active area of the screen. What part of the touch pad is active as you are looking through the viewfinder? Again, if you're right eye dominant, this isn't going to be a problem. You can, as long as your nose isn't touching the screen, you might want to go right 1/2, right 1/4, right upper, right lower. Just depends on what part of this monitor you want to make active, and they designate it with this black box or the clear box. The whole screen, that's the part that's going to be active. If I was a right eye dominant shooter, I'd probably go with lower right or 1/2 right, 1/4 right, something like that. Unfortunately, I am not a right-eyed shooter, and this opens a huge can of worms for everybody who is left-eye dominant. I did a poll, and about 1/3 of photographers naturally are left-eye dominant. So when your left eye is here, what this means is your nose is going to be here touching the monitor. So as your nose is touching the monitor, even if you have the right part here active, I can't tell you how many times my nose will hit part of it and it'll change the focusing square. So left eye shooters are now kind of stuck with this problem. There's a few things we can do about it. One, you could shoot right eye if you're willing to change. It's very uncomfortable at first, but it can be done. And then go right eye shooting, right eye touchpad. The other thing you can do is shoot left eye and use your left thumb to change the focusing square in this left corner if your nose is over here. The problem with this is it changes how you hold the camera, and with very heavy lenses, it's just not natural shooting unless you're on a tripod. So I don't recommend that either. Another option is to turn this off as you're looking through the viewfinder, and as a left eye shooter, this is what I do. I know that's bad news, but it just makes my life easier that I can turn this off. My nose can touch the monitor while I'm shooting, and it just doesn't matter. So my personal setting is panel only. In this way, my nose is not screwing things up. I know this sounds like a silly discussion right now, but just wait until you start shooting with this pad active and your squares going around everywhere. This brings up another problem, which I'm going to give you a solution for right now, is that how do you change your focusing squares if this is turned off? You can't come over here and just start pushing on the directional, multi-selector. So there has to be a way to activate this to turn it into a way that we can move the focusing square around. And this is referred to as the focusing standard. The problem with this is it's a custom control and we have to choose where to put it. My advice, if you are a left-eyed shooter, is to put it on your C2, which is your garbage can icon. Now your C2 is your white balance, right? So the suggestion that I would make is change your white balance in your function menu. There it is. So anytime you need it, you can push FN and go. Because changing your focusing squares is going to be happening a lot more than changing your white balance in terms of the directional pad. So this is the way you should do it. We're going to come into the menu. This is the solution that I would suggest. You're not locked into it. I think this is the easiest way to get around it. We're going to go to Custom Key. And this allows us to customize the different buttons that we have access to. So the AF/MF toggle is this button right here. If we flip this down, AEL hold is right here. It's the second one. And we have our white balance. And some of the other custom keys that we have access to when we're shooting is eye autofocus right here. We have our drive modes, ISO, exposure compensation. I think those are all good. Focusing modes is at C1 near the front. I think that's also a good place for it. And we have a focus hold on certain lenses. So for me personally, I think this is where we should change it. You're going to come into white balance and we're looking for something that says focus standard. Here's somewhere. There it is. Focus standard means that we're telling the camera we're going to use the multi-selector as a focus changer. So now when we push the C2 button, we can push on the directional pad or this multi-selector and move it around. This is going to allow left eye shooters to shoot in their natural style. They can change the focusing squares by pressing the garbage can icon and using the directional pad. It's either that or making this active and bumping it with your nose. So one of those two things should work out for you, and I hope that helps. So let's talk about the video shooting settings just a little bit. I'm in manual mode. Look at the size of my image over here, and as I flip it over to video, you can see that it punches in. So the crop factor for video is going to be a little different depending on how many frames per second you're shooting at. So what's happening for video mode is we're getting a different aspect ratio, 16:9, and we're getting a full pixel for pixel readout. So at 24 frames per second on 4K, it's a full sensor readout. Try to remember how big that image is. And we're going to come into video recording and we're going to, Super 35, APS-C sensor, that should be about right. Let's go to 30 frames per second. Watch what happens. See how it gets more punched in? So if we come back out to this stills mode, and we come back into video mode, it's far more punched in. And if this is anything like other Sony A6000 series cameras, it's about a 1.9 crop factor, and it's using more of a central part of the sensor, about 13 megapixels. So if you're shooting 4K at 30 frames per second, keep that in mind. It's a great quality video. There's no line skipping or pixel binning, which means this data isn't being thrown away. It's all sampled and it's resized in the processor. That's why some of the earlier A6000 cameras were overheating. There's a lot of processing going on. But your resolutions, you're going to have access to them in the purple tab. Record setting, I'm a big fan of 4K, but if you don't want 4K, we have HD settings. You can come in here and select that. One option that you are going to love is that when we're shooting HD, we have the ability to record 120 frames per second. So when you play this back in regular speed, it's going to appear to be slow motion. So if you're doing serious video shooting, you're going to be spending a lot of time in these menus here. I like 4K most of the time. That's just me, 30 frames per second. Let's talk about some of the other features you're going to see in the video shooting mode. We still have access to our focusing clusters. I'm going to go with a larger one. And something I want to show you is how we can touch on the screen and change the position of that. We're going to go to autofocus continuous. Remember, we have a touch pad. So very smooth. I'm going to move this closer towards the camera so you can see how good this is. We can focus on this. We can focus on the face. Very quick, smooth, accurate. It's very nice. If we were to turn on face detection, see it's off right now. Glad we assigned it over there. Turn it on. It'll still work. But when I'm standing in front of the camera talking with a Sony camera, I use face detection all the time because it's very good, it's very fast, it's very accurate. So this is how we can pull focus without needing any special equipment. Just touch on the monitor. We're going to let it do the work. Something else I want to point out is these audio levels, is we want to make sure, second page of the purple tab, we can adjust the level of this. If it's too loud, we can turn it down just depending on what kind of environment you're in. Very important. Talking a little bit more about the menu section in just a second here. This setting right here, the movie setting. Let's get back to that page. The exposure mode, in my opinion, most of the time should be on manual. That's just how I like to shoot. So we can dial in our shutter speed and our aperture on our own. Aperture priority, sometimes if you're doing running and gunning type shooting, very useful for certain video makers. Let's zoom out here. Most of the other techniques for video shooting, I'm going to be demonstrating on the crash course. There's different styles of shooting. There's narrative, that's like film. There are documentary style, interview style. We have vlogging style. There's running gunning style. So there's a few different techniques to understand and master when you're shooting video. So let's get into the menu system. And for the sake of time, I'm going to be making a few recommendations. There's probably less than 20% of the stuff in here are going to be the most important. You are not going to use a huge amount of the options in here, but I'm going to give you a quick overview, and then on the full crash course, I go into the comprehensive coverage of it and go into the philosophies of some of these settings, things of that nature. It's far more in detail on the crash course. So on the top, and the menu systems are confusing. Even now, I've been shooting Sony for many years now, 5 years, and it's still confusing. So the red tab is for stills, mostly. Purple tab is for video, mostly. We have our network setting. I'm going to show you how to connect to a smartphone and use the app. We have playback. We have our camera setup, and we have a customizable menu. So within each colored tab, there are individual pages, and we can see these on the bottom here of the screen, also designated with what page we're on divided by the total number of pages. And you can see that on the bottom. The icon with the little mountain refers to a still, and the icon with a film strip refers to video. And so if you see that feature, this is saying this is for stills only or for film only, depending on what we're looking at. So some of these are kind of mixed up in different places, and this is, I think, where a lot of the confusion comes in. And you're also going to notice that we often get things grayed out. It wants us to be in a certain mode for this to work. So when we're talking about the file format, this is whether it's RAW or JPEG. We can shoot RAW only, JPEG and RAW, or just JPEG. If you're a pure beginner, start off with JPEG. When you have your JPEG selected, we can determine the degree of compression, whether it's extra fine, fine, or standard. Compression means that the processor is going to make the image smaller, but it's going to lose some quality. Some of this cannot be seen by the naked eye, just depending on how good of a pixel peeper you are and what you're shooting. In the beginning, start off with extra fine. The image size, I recommend for the most case, shoot on large, 24 megapixels. You can easily downsize if you need to after. It's not so easy to take a smaller resolution and upsize it. Aspect ratio, I like 3:2. My dad loves to shoot 16:9, cinema aspect ratio. My philosophy on this is you can always crop it out if you need to. And if we want to change the panorama mode, I'm going to flip this over to the panorama mode. Now it's highlighted. We can go standard, we can go extra wide. We can change the direction, going to the right, to the left, up, or down. So that's the first page of the red tab. Long exposure noise reduction is something I recommend leaving on. Anything over a second is considered a long exposure. It's going to allow the camera to clean up some of this. Same with high ISO noise reduction. I'd recommend leaving this on normal. Higher ISOs get very grainy. I think Sony's do a pretty good job of cleaning up the JPEGs in camera. sRGB, most of us are going to be shooting on sRGB. If you're shooting for a magazine and you know what Adobe RGB is, you would select that. Lens compensation. Essentially, this is the lenses communicating with the camera body to clean up certain problems, such as chromatic aberration or distortion, maybe vignetting in the quarters, things of that nature. These are all set to auto. We can turn them off if we don't want that cleanup occurring. Page 3. So auto mode and scene selection, it wants us to turn to the auto mode to get access to this. And it's giving us the option to choose between intelligent auto or superior auto. I don't recommend my students use these, so I tell them not to. In the scene mode, if we rotate over there to the scene button, we can come in and select the different scene modes. from the menu. Superior Auto Image Extract works with the Superior Auto mode. It's basically asking whether you want it to select and save one image auto or save all of them. Let's leave it on that, but again, this isn't something I would recommend. Drive mode, we've seen this. These are the drive modes we talked about earlier. Bracketing settings, we can come in here and choose the different bracketing. Talked about that in the function menu. We can also choose the order that our bracket settings are working. So even exposure, under exposure, over exposure, or under, even, over. Interval shooting function. This is an intervalometer built into our camera. It's very nice. Back in the day, we had to use an app to do this. We can come in and turn this on. I'll be demonstrating how to use this down at a Sunset Beach shoot on the crash course. Basically, we can set a start time, set the interval, the number of shots, tracking. We can have silent shooting, and basically we're programming the camera to start shooting on its own. We can take those images and put them together. It's a great feature to have built into the camera. Page 4, we talked about recall and memory. Register custom shoot set. This is a little confusing. Essentially, we have 3 custom holds that mean that when we push a certain button down, so if we wanted manual exposure with an aperture of f8 or maybe a wide aperture f2.8, we could come in, we could designate the drive, the exposure compensation, all these settings we can dial in specifically and hit register. So that saved all of those specific settings to custom hold 1. The idea on this is that, of course, you would know, because you're a pure beginner, that this is something you need to do over here on page 8 of the purple tab, is that now we can designate that custom hold to a custom key. And the idea is, if we came in here, we should find it. Oh, there it is. Recall custom hold 1. There it goes. So if I was to select this, I would be making this button here. If I push and hold it down, remember those settings for a brief moment until I lifted my thumb off that button. So it's a brief temporary switch over to a memory position that we can designate all the way here back on page 4. And that's how it works. That's the idea of it. Page 5, we can talk about the focusing modes. We've already talked about this. We can come in and select them from the menu. In autofocus single, what do you want to do first? Do you want it to focus or do you want it to release? A lot of this is preference. The focus area, we've already demonstrated how to select this from the shooting mode. We can limit which of our focusing clusters will appear. If there's too many and you're feeling overwhelmed, we can come in here and turn some of those off. This is something I kind of like because it allows us to switch from vertical and horizontal, and it remembers the focusing cluster that we had. So you want the point or point and an area. I think it's pretty handy, but again, this could be personal preference. As you're shooting portrait, horizontal, you might flip it up and you want those squares to stay where they were last time. Autofocus illuminator, if it's very dark, we'll have this autofocus assist lamp come on. We talked about face and eye detection in the focusing lesson. Back button focus we talked about. Turn this off to make it work. Pre-autofocus is something I actually recommend turning off. If you leave it on, the camera is going to be focusing before you even push a shutter button down. I think it puts a drain on the battery, and sometimes it's annoying. I start AF, and it's confusing. This has to do with adapting A-mount lenses to our body, so let's not worry about this. Autofocus area registration, if we turn this on, it's going to allow us to register a custom focusing area. If we press and hold the FN button, we'd have to assign that to a custom key. I'm going to turn this off for now. We have face registrations. There's some micro adjusting. There's a bunch of cool features in here if you really want to get into it. We have our ISO metering, face priority, and multi-metering. If we turn this on, it's going to give facial features a priority in the multi-metering mode. We have spot metering. We have our exposure steps. All these are good stuff. Auto exposure lock with halfway shutter button depression. I like this, so I leave it on or auto. Exposure standard adjust. I wouldn't mess with this if you're a brand new shooter, intermediate photographer. We're going to be talking about flash on the crash course. We spend a good 30 or 40 minutes crash course on how to use it. We do have a built-in flash. It's not very big, this little teeny guy that pops up. And there are some ways to control the power of it when we come into FN. So if we pop that flash up, come into FN, flash exposure compensation is right here. So if we wanted to increase the power of the flash, we could increase it here. We want to turn it down. It's not a very big flash, but if you have nothing else, it can save you in certain situations. I'll be demonstrating this on the crash course. Flash exposure compensation can be adjusted here. When we change exposure compensation, do we want it to apply to both ambient and the strobe, or just ambient light only? There is a really good setup for wireless flash. I'll be making a recommendation on the crash course. Red eye reduction is going to fire a pre-flash to dilate the pupil of your subject. I want to turn that on. Page 11 is mostly the stuff we talked about in the beginning. We can change our white balance from here. We can change the priority of our white balance. There's ambient and white balance if you're using auto white balance. We have our D-range optimizer, auto HDR. We have these are very similar to what we chose in the beginning. Something that's different here is we have HDR mode, which allows us to determine how many stops in that mode we want to take. We're doing some demonstrations with that on the full crash course. Our creative styles in the beginning, stick with standard, but if you wanted to play with these after you get a hang of things, basically get some options here to tweak the contrast, saturation, and the sharpness. And so some people start playing with this to do things in camera. Videographers will play with this. They'll turn down the contrast, they'll turn down the saturation because they're going to be grading, things of that nature. A lot of these have some presets in there, in terms of more saturation or better flesh tones. There's so many of them. I mean, it's got to be like 12 of them at least. In the beginning, stick with standard. We also have the picture effects. Most of these are not serious tools. They're kind of fun. They apply funky filters to your pictures. There's tons of them. There's options within them. I don't use them ever. Picture profiles, again, a lot of this has to do with video shooting, where we can come in and pick these predetermined standards, for example, that have S-log, which basically capture greater dynamic range. And this, you could spend an hour or two talking about all the settings in here. And there are some people who do it. They actually come in and they'll go through everything on the internet. There's certain recipes that people like. You can really, no other camera company gets into this much detail for video shooting as Sony. But for the beginning and intermediate photographer, I'm going to tell you in the beginning, don't worry about it. Just turn them off for now. We have a soft skin effect if you wanted to apply it. We also have auto white balance lock when the shutter button is either halfway down or continuously shooting. Some of these, I've never seen these. We talked about most of these in the focusing lessons. And we also have the ability to register faces. This is something Sony cameras have done for a while. So if your child was at a party and you wanted the camera to focus on only your child's face, the idea is you could register the face and the camera would be looking for it. Smile shutter means that the camera is looking for the moment of smiling before firing. Auto object framing is an automatic cropping feature. I don't really recommend this. You can do it in post, no problem. Self-portrait timer, if we take the monitor and flip it up facing the direction of the lens and push the shutter button, if this is turned on, it's a 3-second timer. And then we're into the purple tab, so we're going to rotate over to the movie mode so we get access to a lot of these guys. So we talked about our resolution, 4K, HD. Usually I'm on 4K or HD. I never use the AVC HD. It's a really low quality video. We have our frames per second. We'll be spending quite a bit of time talking on the video recording settings. So what are these numbers here? 100M. That's the data rate, 100 megabits per second. There's 8 megabits per megabyte. So if you do the math, about 12 or 13 megabytes per second. So it's a frame rate and then a data rate. 24 is saying it's using the entire sensor. S&Q Settings. We have a dial on our mode dial for S&Q. And so if we flip that over, we're going to be given access to the S&Q menu setting up here. I'm more of a manual exposure setting. I like to dial it in. So the idea on S&Q is that if you come into the settings, you can determine what you're going to play it back at and your frames per second. So if we shoot at 120 frames per second at 30p, and we record in S&Q mode, we should be able to play it back and see it 4 times more slow. On the other hand, if we shoot at 1 frame per second, you know, almost like a time-lapse movie, and then play it back, it's going to play back super, super fast. So this is the S&Q mode position allows us to designate whether we want it to play back slow or fast, depending on the playback frames per second and the frame rate that we're shooting at. Proxy recording, give instructions to the camera to make separate proxy files. They're smaller, and videographers who do a lot of editing prefer proxy files, and they edit the proxy files, which are smaller, which give the instructions to edit the full resolution images. It's a way to save, you know, processing speed and power on computers. Very common. If you're a beginning videographer, don't worry about it right now. We can adjust the drive speed and the tracking sensitivity of our video. If you noticed when I was doing the rack zoom, it wasn't the fastest. We could speed that up if we wanted to. We could make it more responsive if we wanted to with these options in here. Auto slow shutter, I would actually recommend turning this off. It's going to give the camera permission to use a slower shutter speed when you're recording videos and it's dark. We have our initial focus magnification power. We talked about audio recording. Want that on in the levels. Level display, I'm definitely a fan of that. Wind noise reduction, I've never successfully noticed a significant difference. We can put dead cats on our microphones to help limit wind noise. Marker display, if we turn this on, it's going to allow us to see certain aspect ratios if we wanted to, things of that nature. We can turn on these overlays, guide frames, things of that nature if you wanted to see that as you're shooting video. We can start and stop video recording with the shutter button if this is turned on. So a lot of these are just kind of preference thing. So as we go to page 4, you can see that it's changed to shutter and steady shot. We have silent shooting, which is completely quiet. It uses an electronic shutter. We have an electronic front curtain shutter. I think the default is this turned on. So what's happening is we're only getting the second shutter to close the exposure. Listen. 1 click. Turn this off. 2 clicks. We hear the opening of the first shutter and then the closing of the second shutter. We can designate whether to release without a lens or without a card. If you're adapting a lens over, a non-Sony lens, maybe an old lens, you would want this on. Steady shot, definitely recommend leaving that turned on. It's our stabilization. Page 5, we have some zoom settings. The one you might be interested in is the clear image zoom. We have a 16-50 lens, and so when we have optical zoom only, you can see we get this, it stops at 50. There's a digital zoom, which is a digital magnification. It's usually pretty terrible, pixelated and grainy. And the clear image zoom is proprietary technology from Sony. I guess it makes sense to turn it on as long as you know what you're doing when you zoom in. So once you get over 50 millimeters, we get this focus magnifier. We're at 100 millimeters using this clear image zoom technology that Sony uses to clean up the image. I'm not even really sure how it works, but it's an interesting feature. They claim that it's going to allow you to zoom in without losing any resolution. So when we push up on the display button, we were talking through all those different screens. This is asking which of those screens do you want to see. So when we're looking in the viewfinder or in the monitor, so we talk about the monitor, we have all these different displays. Which ones do you want to show? That's basically it. We do the same for the viewfinder. Not quite as many, but we can control the types of information that are being shown. Finder monitor, this is a very handy feature if you use gimbals. Auto means the sensor is going to turn it off. We can go viewfinder only, or if we just wanted to see the back monitor, so if we're on a gimbal, switch doesn't turn off. Leave it on auto for now. So this is the viewfinder frame rate for still shooting? Do you want it to be standard or do you want it to be a high-speed frame rate refresh? Zebras allow us to see when the image is starting to be overexposed. Let's just turn this up to, let's turn it up to 100. So the zebra warnings, if I bump up my ISO, we'll see them as these marching ants, basically saying at this setting, which is 100, this is going to be pure white. Anything with these diagonals is going to be overexposed with that particular setting. Pretty handy for video shooting, I think. And typically, people will turn them down so they kick in earlier. So when we're at 95% of clipping out, we would see that as a warning. We can turn on different grids as we're shooting if we wanted to. The exposure set guide, when we change our exposure settings, you see how we get this magnified view? If we don't want that, we can come in and turn that off. Now we're just sticking with the regular view. So in dark studios, if we turn this off, the camera is going to brighten it up. It's going to allow us to see what we're doing. It's going to allow us to focus. We're using strobes and the camera may not know that. So that's the only time I would recommend turning it off. Auto image review, if you wanted it to play back, we have 2, 5, and 10 seconds. And then we get into some of the custom keys, depending on whether we're taking stills, video, or in playback. So we have some customization ability depending on these buttons. We talked a little bit about it. We didn't have a lot of real estate for stills, but in video we can customize a lot of these same keys as well. Right now it's following the stills. We wanted to change that. We got 19 pages of options. So it feels like for video shooting, we have a lot more flexibility, and you can just come in and choose literally anything that you want based on your preference and style of shooting. We have the directional pad, up, down, left, right, the center button. Right now it's all following the stills. So that's nice. And then when we have playback, we're just playing an image. Right now the FN button will send to the smartphone. And then we have the C1 button that we can also customize if we wanted to. Only 6 pages of stuff in here. A lot of that's the playbacks in the blue tab that we haven't really talked about. Pretty basic stuff in there. Function menu, we've covered how to customize this, and you will after some time. The My Dial settings allow us to customize the rotating dials just as we did with the buttons on the red tab. The way it works is we come in, we designate a feature that we want, whatever it is, auto record levels, for example. Then we come back out, and we can do it for both the control dial and the control wheel. Then we would come out, come into a dial specifically, as we would here. We can come into the drive mode, for example, and we would look for the My Dial setting that we set up. Seems like a lot of trouble to go through. Toggle My Dial 1, 2, and 3. There they are. And so the idea is that this would allow some more customization, if we wanted to the dials instead of buttons. So the dial and the wheel settings, I think they're set up fine. This typically has to do with the manual mode. So if you remember in the manual mode, we dial in the aperture with our main dial, and then with the rotating dial, did the shutter speed. We can switch that if we wanted to. We can change how the directions are normal or reversed if we wanted to. So when we're talking about exposure compensation, the way I demonstrated I think is pretty good. If you wanted direct exposure compensation control without pushing down, we could just set this up to be the wheel. I think it's better if we have this to off and then push down. We have what happens when we touch on the screen. Do you want it to trigger the shutter? Do you want it to track? I like the focus. The video record button, do you always want it to record video or only in the movie mode? We can lock certain dials that are dial on our wheel if we wanted to. Audio signals, which is the beep function. So that's a purple tab. So between the red tab and the purple tab, that's most of the stuff. That's most of our settings in here. We're going to be talking about the Wi-Fi lesson. In the playback menu, a lot of this is pretty straightforward. We can protect images, multiple images, all with a date. We can cancel it. The idea is that you come in here and we press the set button and it would mark it to protect it. And if you were to erase the memory card with the erase feature, it would be protected. That will not protect you from a reformatting. Just keep that in mind. We can rotate images, we can delete images, including multiple images, scrolling through and selecting them if we wanted to. We can assign ratings that would be respected in Lightroom or Photoshop, 1 to 5 stars. You can see it right up there. A lot of this stuff I don't use. We can have a rating set for a custom key. We can specify printing. I just say get the memory card reader. We can zoom in on images. You can do this during playback if you just play and hit the zoom button, which is designated right here. You can change the initial magnification. When we zoom in, do you want it to be on the center or where our focusing square is currently selected? So there's some other information in here. The playback for the intervalometer, the speed for the intervalometer. We can do a slideshow. We have different view modes in terms of you want to see by date, folder, format for video. Gives us this calendar grid that we can scroll through. If we wanted to go through by months, and you can view our images. I've only been shooting on Monday, the 4th of March. But you would, if you had it on a big memory card, you could see all the different days that you shot on. You could scroll this way. We can navigate by date, image. We can do by video, formats. Pretty crazy. When we display our images for playback, do you want it to show 12 images or 30 images? I'll show you what this is referring to. So here's 12. Let's see if we can get 30. I haven't even taken 30 images. We can display it as a group, on or off. We can display rotation. A lot of this is just playback stuff. The setup is pretty self-explanatory. Most of this in here is monitor brightness. We can come in and change when we're on manual. When we have it on sunny, it's really just full power. Otherwise, we can come in here and turn it up. Same with the viewfinder. We can change the viewfinder color temperature through here. Gamma display assist. Essentially, if we're shooting in a certain S-Log, for example, the display assist will show us a preview of what it should look like after it's graded. We have volume settings for the beep. Tile menu allows us to break the menu down into thumbnail images. If this will make your life easier. Maybe for some people it will. I'm not a huge fan. The mode dial guide, if we turn this on and change our modes, we get some prompts. There it is. Not a huge fan. Delete confirmation. So when we press the garbage can icon, do you want it to be on cancel first or do you want it to be on delete first so you don't accidentally bump the delete button? The display quality, should it be high or standard? We have some power saving features. I've turned mine to 30 minutes because I'm teaching right now. Probably be on 5 when I'm shooting. Auto power off temperature. So if you're shooting outdoors and the camera's getting hot, it'll power off, and we can basically turn this to high and it would raise the temperature. Are you sure you want to do this? Sure. We have our NTSC PAL selector. Obviously I'm an NTSC, I don't want to change it, but if you were, you could. We can clean the sensor by entering to the sensor cleaning mode. Here it goes. It's going to vibrate a little filter that hangs over the sensor, kicks off any dust. I'm going to demonstrate on the crash course how to physically clean your sensor. Touch operation, panel pad, pad settings. We talked about all this. If we were selling the camera in a store, we'd turn on the demo mode. Time code settings. So for video recording, we get all kinds of time code options if we wanted to change some of these. A couple of these last settings before we get into the custom menu is we have the ability to turn on a remote control if we wanted to have that option. Lots of HDMI settings. I have a Ninja 5 that I'll be demonstrating on the crash course how to use it as an external recorder. We get higher chroma subsampling, 8-bit 422, and so we can control things like the resolution. We can have auto, frame rate, if it's whether it's displaying information. If you want it clean, we can turn it off. Just record, time code output, tons of options. Control from the HDMI recorder. We have our 4K output selection setting, our USB connection settings. So if you were going to connect to a smartphone for storage or if we wanted to turn on our power supply so you can charge your battery in your camera through a USB power battery pack. Very cool. You should have gotten a little USB plug and adapter. A6400 doesn't come with a battery charger, which is kind of interesting. So the idea is that you charge it in your camera. I'll be making some recommendations in the accessories. Cheap charger, you get 2 extra batteries, it's like 35 bucks. These batteries are small, you're gonna go through them quickly. I think it's a pretty good investment. We have our PC remote settings, language, date and time setup, the area we're in, copyright information. So we can write our copyright info, turn this on, and then we would type in our name. We could type in copyright information. We can display them, and those would be embedded to the EXIF metadata of our images. This one's very useful, format memory card. So once you have at least 2 copies, preferably in separate places, is when you should format your memory cards. It's going to erase everything, including protected images. And so you should try to find a system that works for you. I have a particular system. When I come in from a shoot, I download my images to an external hard drive, and those images and video files are then sent to an assistant in a different state. He copies them and he makes a backup. I make a backup of what I have. So there's literally 4 copies of everything we shoot in 2 different places. So it's very hard for us to lose any videos or stills. So the likelihood is that you don't have an assistant like me. There are some options where you can download to a hard drive and back it up onto the cloud, or you can back it up to another hard drive, preferably somewhere else. Why? Because things happen. There's flooding, sometimes there's damage, theft, and if those images are important to you, you want to have a backup somewhere else. But every time I put in a new card or a card that's done into the camera, I reformat it. So file number would reset every time I put a new memory card in it. Series would continue from the last image. You can change the 3-digit name, the first 3 letters at least. We can select the file or the folder we're recording to. I only have one in here right now. We can create a new one. We can change the name. We can try to recover the image database if there's problems. Display media info is just showing you how much room you have left depending on the setting. So I'm on a video, standard HD, it says 2 hours and 40 minutes. If I was on a still mode, I came in here, display, now it's showing me the total number of images. So version will display the software that we have for both the camera body as well as the lens that we're shooting with. We can reset the settings if we wanted to. So that's the bulk of the tabs. The last one is the My Menu setting. Very useful to add items that you often go through, and one of them for me is formatting. So I would select that. I'm going to add it to that location. And so the idea on this is that we could come through and let's say we wanted to do file format. We could add that too, add it. As you shoot, you're going to find that there's only a handful of these that you're going to change often. Another one would be the focus magnifier. Very common. I want that all the time. I don't have to dig for it. So when you're done, press the menu. We can sort these items, move it down. We can delete an item. We can delete a page. We can delete everything. We can add more items. But the gist of it is you essentially add what you want. And you can see we have a second page now. So on the first page, we have everything. I'm on a video mode, which I can't see the file format. But this allows us to have a favorites tab. So that is a quick overview of the deep menu system. We spend a lot more time on it on the crash course where we get into the philosophies of use and example situations, pretty much cover everything on that. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. So let me give you a quick rundown on Sony's Play Memory app. You need to download it from the App Store. I have an iPhone 10, obviously. This is what it looks like. It's called the Play Memories app. Come into the menu. We're on the green tab. First page, control with smartphone. And there's different ways we can send it to computer. We can send images only. We have airplane mode. But this is the one you're going to want. The most interesting. control smartphone is on. If we had it always connected, I don't recommend that, but let's turn the connection on so we can see what's going on. And it gives us a QR code thing. The thing that I like about this app is it's very easy to connect. The problem is some of the navigation tools aren't exactly perfect. So when you're using the Play Memories app to shoot, images that are transferred to your phone will become accessible under the view. Whether this is a 2 megapixel file or full res, for example. We also have things like news, and you'll notice we have this back stuff, right? So if we wanted to link GPS data, we could do that. It wants us to turn the Bluetooth on. So if you wanted to embed GPS data from your smartphone into the images, we'd have to come in and turn our Bluetooth on. There's a problem with this, is that once we connect and we get into the shooting mode, it's kind of tricky to leave. So this is the easiest way to do it. You can also scan with near field communication. I haven't had success with that. The QR code works really good. So we're gonna hit OK. That's going to turn the camera on. You can see the crosshair, and I'm gonna take this crosshair off and aim it at the QR code. It's going to pair almost instantly. It's very fast. So I don't know if you guys can see that. It's asking me if I want to join. Yes. So here's the problem. As soon as I connect, it wants us to turn the Bluetooth off. And now we're in a shooting mode, which is great. We can come into the menu. We see all these other settings. We can display the settings here. I am on a still shooting mode. There are some great things about this. For example, the 16-50 lens that I have on there, we can actually zoom in and out with it when it works. So we can zoom in. There it goes. Oh, it's cooperating. You can also zoom out. It's like slow a little bit. We can change our white balance settings. Here they are. Amazing, right? Drive mode, single or continuous shooting. We can choose a timer. We can play images back. So let's just take a picture. There it goes. Very nice. Resized image has been saved to the phone. We can play it back. And I have images from like all the Sony cameras that I have on here. We can toggle the information in terms of the focal length, the lens used, lots of great stuff, right? So it seems like it's pretty good. We can change our ISO. I'm on a manual shooting mode, so we have standard ISO control. We can use a faster shutter speed. Lots of really, it's pretty responsive, it's nice, it's good. Some apps will let you focus on the touchscreen. Can't do that here. That's okay. And when I flip over to video mode on the camera, the smartphone responds. Oh, we got our LED lights. Look at this. So if we want to minimize that, you got to think in terms of hertz. 1/60th or 1/125th of a second. Usually we'll eliminate that. There it goes. So if you see that weirdness, see the banding you get, you got to think in terms of the hertz of the light. So 1/125 should mostly solve it. 1/250th should be pretty close. Nope. So 1/25th, yes, and then 1/60th. Should have minimal banding. Good. We can start and stop video recording remotely. I've used this before when I'm shooting certain videos and I'm in them and I want to frame them up. We don't have a front-facing monitor. We can even rotate the screen. So here's the big problem, at least at the time of this recording, with this version of the app. Do you see a way to get back out to the main menu? I cannot find it. Even if we come into camera information. So I cannot find that. Nope. Nope. Swipe. Nope. Nope. Is the limitation. Oh, there it goes. What happened? And it takes me back into the shooting mode. Okay. So that's the problem with the app at the time of this recording, is the navigation to get out to the menu, to set up the GPS stuff, to do the playback. can't get there. You can play images here. So in any event, that is a quick way to connect to the Play Memories app and some of the cool features in terms of remote shooting, playback, things of that nature, downloading it to your smartphone. Really, really awesome. So there are some lens recommendations I need to give you about the A6400. I think the 16 to 50 kit lens is a pretty good place to start, and it's worth hanging on to even when you upgrade, simply because it's very small and light. You can use it on gimbals. Lots of general purpose shooting you can do with this. At some point, you're going to want a little bit more reach. The 55 to 210, I've seen it all day long on eBay used for about $160 or $170. Those two lenses to start are going to be a good place, if you're on a budget. But at some point, you're probably going to want to invest in glass that is a little bit sharper and has a wider aperture. That said, keep in mind that Sony's E mount has two versions, one for APS-C cameras and one for full frame cameras. This is something that you're going to have to read in the fine print when purchasing a lens, because we have a 50mm 1.8 FE full frame and a 50mm 1.8 OSS, which is designed for APS-C. We can take APS-C lenses and put them on full frame camera bodies, but the corners are going to be dark. We can take full frame lenses and put them on APS-C bodies, and we can use them and shoot with them as we normally would. So a lot of the advice that I give depends on whether or not you see yourself upgrading to a full frame Sony sensor. If you do, and you know that's going to happen, the 28 to 70 kit lens, it's just under $400. That is a great general purpose shooting lens. If you want something with a wider aperture, the most affordable option at the time of this recording is Tamron's 28 to 75 2.8. It's about $900. And then we start getting into the G Master series, which is the 16 to 35 2.8, the 24 to 70 2.8, the 70 to 200 2.8, and the 100 to 400 for sport shooting. You're looking at just under $10,000 for all four of those. So if money isn't a problem, that's the cream of the crop. Other accessories you're definitely going to want to look at. Battery. In the time of this recording, we went through 3 of these, just leaving the camera on to talk about the back of the camera. This battery is made by a company called Green Extreme. I found these on Panorama. 2 of them with an external charger for about $38. The camera doesn't come usually with an external battery charger. The idea is that you can plug it into a USB port and charge with the battery in the camera. And because you're going to be going through batteries so quick, I think an external charger is a must-have. That's the best value I've seen at the time of this recording. The Sony batteries are like $55 each. One of the limitations of the front-facing monitor is that we have a hot shoe mount here that we want to put an external microphone on, and that would block the monitor. So SmallRig has this nice side extension that moves it over by the shutter button. I think that's a no-brainer investment as well. And yes, you are going to want an external microphone. Rode has a huge lineup. I like the Pro version the most, but they have some lower end ones that are definitely going to be better than the built-in microphone. Very important investment is going to be a set of tripod legs. You can get them with aluminum or carbon fiber legs. I like the carbon fiber, they're lighter. I like a locking ball head. It's tremendously versatile. You can shoot portraits, landscapes, you can do video, long exposures, things of that nature. It's really smart to have a good tripod in your arsenal. Bogen Manfrotto has the Be-Free, and then there's another company called MePhoto. If you do a search for those two, you're going to see all kinds of different variations and combinations. I'm not a huge fan of the Walmart tripods. I mean, you can make them work if you don't have anything else, but the truth of the matter is they're flimsy and they break over time. At some point, you're going to want to get something a little bit better in terms of flash photography. We have this little teeny flash up here. Godox makes the TT685S, that stands for Sony, and I'll actually cover how to use that flash on the crash course. It's like 30 or 40 minutes of introduction to strobe with your camera. All that said, I still believe the best investment that you can make is right here, your brain and the skill set and knowledge. The Sony A6400 crash course is in production. It'll be ready in a couple weeks. If you want to be notified, again, leave your name and your email address on my blog and we will reach out to you as soon as it's ready. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial of the Sony A6400, and I will see you on the crash course. Have a great day.